All right, ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome back once again to the longest running show in the world about data. It's called DMRadio. Yours truly, Eric Kavanagh, here in my old haunt, New Orleans, down at the Convention Center for the Confluent Current event. And I've been going to these things for a while now, and I got to tell you, the currency is high. Things are happening. There are lots and lots of announcements here at Current, and Kafka is taking the world by storm. And someone who knows all about that is Kamal Brar, my guest today. So, Kamal, welcome to the show. You are the partner king of Confluent, so you're all over, globe-trotting every day, huh?
Very, very kind of you, Eric. I mean, and I'm really excited to be here. Thank you for inviting me. It's a privilege to be here.
Absolutely. So, we've talked about data on this show for 17 and a half years, and Confluent is really focused on the data side of the equation, which guess what? That's what AI needs. And I think we're really at the beginning of this whole agentic revolution, but the handwriting is on the wall everywhere. This is very serious stuff. It's going to fundamentally change access patterns, application design, how people get things done. Where do you begin when you talk to your partners to kind of figure out where they are and how Confluent can collaborate with them?
Yeah, absolutely. So look, you know what's fascinating? The entire ecosystem around our partners in some shape or form is being disrupted.
Wow.
And, I think there's no surprises. Some of them have probably done things in a more traditional manner, and now they're having to rethink, retool on their approach to go to market. And so, from a partnership standpoint, pretty much everyone's kind of really tuned in to see how Confluent fits into the AI disruption.
Mm-hmm.
And we're kind of the square peg, like we're right in smack in the middle of it. And you can't really avoid not working towards some of these interesting, I would say, dynamics around some of the use cases around agentic and, whether it's LLM, frontier LLMs, like a lot of these systems require real-time data, and they require the ability to serve that data with high fidelity and obviously accuracy and velocity. But I think more importantly, it's just being able to provide things such as, feedback loops. As you train these models and you think about some of the complexity where, you've got different countries, different localities, different languages, and you're training not just a training data set on just text in the web, but you've got voice models now that also require audio input, and then you're going to hopefully get the accuracy and fidelity on voice, not just in English, but also maybe in Japanese or in Spanish or in Korean.
Right.
And so we're working very hard in trying to work out where these systems and where these pipelines need Confluent and how we come together. So candidly, for our partnership, it means that we're having to work more than ever. And today you would have seen it current, we announced, our alignment with Anthropic. You saw our alignment with Salesforce and their agentic framework. And so candidly, I think this is going to continue to expand. And one of the things, and you've been this for a long time, as I have, is what I've seen is that in the past, partnerships were a kind of like a dynamic which led to hopefully a new opportunity. In the world of AI, it's almost like a must-have. Like if you don't have the right ecosystem integrations, you don't have the right ecosystem players, you lose out on the network effect. And so for me, I feel like more than ever before, partnerships are critical. And so for us, we're seeing that across our service integration team. I mean, service integrators, we're seeing that across our ISVs who build amazing tech with us and integrate with us. And then the cloud providers, like I'm sure you covered those in your podcast around what they're doing and in terms of some of their services, and GCP is doing a whole bunch. We've got AWS who is obviously, and of course Microsoft. So we're in the thick of it. It's been busy.
Right. Well, one of the really interesting dynamics now is that the bottleneck has become the business side. For the longest time, the bottleneck was the software side. You would have these long development cycles. Of course, we came up with Agile. What was it, 20 years ago now?
Yeah, that's when I was learning tech.
Okay, yeah, that's the beginning. And it's funny because I had a guest on the show who kind of blew my mind. He said, look, why did we even go with Agile? And the answer is we don't know what the business wants. So you have to do this minimum viable product and just get started because you don't want to spend too much time and effort getting on the wrong track. Well, now you can bang out applications and code in almost no time, which means that the pressure is on the business to validate what's being built, to integrate it into their operations. Is that part of your conversation, especially with the systems integrators, because they're the ones who are leaned on to kind of get this stuff done and patched in? What do you think about this remarkably shifting dynamic?
Yeah, so pretty much all the integrators are working on some type of framework on defining what that disruption looks like. And so some of them have different models where they're replicating an FD approach on how they think about building or rolling out some of the AI capabilities. We announced a partnership with Infosys. They have a framework called Topaz, and their agentic framework and AI ready framework is all around kind of streamlining some of what they call the context information and bringing context to AI, which is a lot of the conversations we've had with our partners throughout the week. So I feel like they're all adjusting, and the reality is this: they're very large organizations, and they have no choice because ultimately, I think this is probably the most important transformation we'll see in tech,
I think
probably,
so.
and
Yeah.
what I've seen in my lifetime in tech.
Right.
And it's going to be an opportunity for them to hopefully reimagine on how they think about resourcing, how they think about deployment of their skill sets, and then build the right, I would say, the software components. But you made an interesting point. You said the business has become the bottleneck. I think the challenge is most of the CIOs today are very operationally focused, and some of that may be innovation around, hey, we unlock a certain value outcome, or we accelerate time to market, or we drive cost reduction. But with AI, it's at a magnitude or scale that's never been seen before. So, I'm a software engineer. That's how I learned tech. And I went through that phase of writing code and building code. I would never imagine today I could go to a
Right.
tool like, and I don't endorse anyone, but like, I could go to
Right.
any OpenAI or a Replit or a Cursor, and all of these tools could build a prototype for me in a very quick amount of time,
Right.
without a ton of software development knowledge, right?
Right.
And you talked about agile. I learned waterfall,
Yeah.
right? And so in that context, it's pretty remarkable. And that's the shift. We're seeing customers wanting to see how do they bring value with that to the business, because the business doesn't understand potential consequence or potential impact,
hmm
and a lot of the prototyping is not production ready. And so that's where there's a huge focus on FDEs, because the reality is some of the businesses don't know what they want. And a lot of the SIs are spending time on scoping, validating, but then they actually build the product or build the AI agentic offerings to help optimize as part of that journey. So I
hmm
think it's a different approach to maybe
hmm
what's done in the past, where in the past they may have had repeatable patterns.
Right.
That's harder to do.
Well, something else you mentioned a couple times, context. Context is king these days. And
Yeah.
the model context protocol, I've been around a long time. I haven't seen anything take off that fast, where all of a sudden there must be 30 of them out there or 40 of them, companies building their model context protocol, their MCP servers,
Yep.
basically. And it's because that is a very powerful link to the chain. So now you have your enterprise systems. You don't want to just open access to an AI algorithm to your enterprise systems. You need some buffer in there somewhere. And it seems to me that MCP is kind of filling that role. I like the solutions that also use a knowledge graph of some kind to express the relationships, because what you're trying to do is optimize the results from this Gen AI, optimize the quality to build trust. I was joking earlier with your colleague over here. Some folks talking about, okay, we got our model up to 90% accuracy. Okay, what part of your business could be wrong 10% of the time? And
Yeah.
the answer is not much, right? So you
Depending
really
on what type of business you're in,
right,
that could
right.
be very expensive.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm encouraged to see this in this real-time context engine. I think you guys are really finding your footing. I mean, you've been around for over 10 years now and have a lot of big customers doing a lot of very interesting things. But there was always this like impedance mismatch with streaming versus static batch-oriented data processing. But I think you guys have really hit on something here with this real-time context engine, because that will be the linchpin to make AI successful, right?
Yeah, and I think it's something candidly our customers wanted.
hmm
And so it's kind of a logical progression where if we want to make it easy and seamless as part of the agentic framework and know how we think about context of information to those agents, it's a no-brainer. We had to do it, unless we work on a SDK that directly integrates with the
Right,
LLMs, and
right,
so we haven't looked at that. At some point in time, I think we will get better I mean, providing even more, I would say, sophistication around that
right,
in terms of some of the LLMs. And so, yeah, so it's an area to watch. I think every 6 months, we've seen a pretty significant shift on what we could do with some of these models.
right,
And I think that's no different for Confluent. We're going to accelerate some of these areas and probably build out tooling and capabilities. Today, we announced a marketplace. And so I think we're going to see more and more of that I wouldn't say consider the extensions to providing some of these things become more accessible and just easier to contribute, especially through our partners.
Yeah, well, I tell you what, you have a very cool job because you get to go around the world and work with all these different partners and you
Yeah.
get to learn. And that's, ever since this LLM thing came out, I found myself thinking about how I process information. How do I remember information? What's the semantic model in my head, basically? And it's kind of a fun exploration, but you get to go into all these different environments and pick up best practices, tips, clever ways of doing things. That really matters when you're putting AI into production, because any number of small mistakes can be the beginning of error propagation, where it's like you cause real trouble downstream if you don't think through it.
Yeah.
So I bet you're learning some interesting tips and tricks around the world. Is that right?
Yeah, actually, the best part about my job is I get to meet all these partners who are potentially, working on our technologies, but also learn how they're disrupting the stack. And so, I made reference to voice models and like, just the sophistication and complexity of that on how they train versus the
Right.
text-based, and perfecting emotions on voice is actually somewhat not trivial. It's a ton of work. So I get to see some of those, I would say, amazing innovations. So that's
Right.
pretty cool. And the other piece I think that's fascinating is just in terms of how you think about scaling these systems. And today, a lot of the AI, I would say, projects are still small, relatively. I mean, it's not to say the LLMs aren't being deployed. Yes, there are, but I'm talking about like true frameworks translating into a business outcome that's still somewhat, I would say,
Mm-hmm.
immature. And I think that's been called out by a number of independent reports.
Right.
But being on that journey and kind of like, I think it's going to dramatically shift. And so, I think there are a ton of examples, and I'm happy to share some that I've seen
Yeah.
personally through those partners that
Yeah.
are
Give us a fun example.
well, I'll tell you one. Like, imagine, I'm trying to build data centers. Everyone's talking about energy and how critical that is to
Yep.
fueling this AI momentum. If you want to build a data center, you've got to find a parcel. You've got to be able to find the right amount of, hopefully, electricity availability in that location. You have to be able to find who owns the parcels, what permits are needed, and
Right.
then, if candidly, is this the right location or is this the type of location you'd want? To do that today is actually pretty manual,
Yeah.
right? And it could take you probably about $500,000 of investment in third-party consulting
Jeez.
that will actually get you that answer.
Right.
Now they're building AI tooling that would actually do the data munging on this and give you that response
Wow.
within minutes. Like we're talking in 2 minutes on something when you think about, hey, how do
Wow.
I go deploy the next 15 data centers? I
Wow.
actually get those requirements
That's
in real time. So
crazy.
they've done the geospatial mapping, the data munging, looked at all those details and actually represent that on a geospatial. I mean, that's pretty cool.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty interesting. I mean, and was that a purpose-built model that led to that, or how did they bring that together?
I think they're still working through it, but like it's just an example of where, a business requirement that, is so critical
Yeah.
when you think about, what we need from the infrastructure standpoint being served through an agentic AI approach,
Wow.
AI first approach, which no one thought of. Like we didn't think we needed that before.
Wow.
So
That's very interesting because it has so many constraints and factors and interdependencies, and it's about granular, real world, tactile stuff,
exactly.
right?
True impact, right?
And being able to run the numbers and then make an honest assessment about what's possible. I mean, I think I've been in the business intelligence industry for 25 years. So for 25 years, we've focused on metrics and trends and analyzing the data. Now with AI, it's almost overwhelming to think about the additional value we can get by leveraging all that data that we've collected. What do you think?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think when I look at these use cases and I see the true impact and acceleration in that case, like look at the time to value, like how quickly you could potentially go from,
Wow.
thinking about doing something to actually getting something approved
Right.
and
Right.
executed. It's phenomenal. And and like even basic things like if you're thinking of transportation, today I don't know what my optimal routes are and what cost arbitrage I have between states on potentially if I have a hybrid vehicle between petrol and electric, and
Right.
how do I look at that if I'm in the business of delivery? That's a significant cost saving for me.
Yeah.
Or potentially, I want to know which of the routes that can save and optimize in terms of my deliveries. So much stuff that you could really leverage, and I think that's the imagination. Like there's no limit to it. It's bringing the business context and impact, and then building very specific, I would say, use cases which kind of can truly resonate with hopefully their customers.
Yeah, what do you think about small language models? There's been a lot of talk about them. These big models, they keep getting bigger, they're doing amazing things, but they are unwieldy. And so the bigger they get, typically the more unwieldy they are, and the more guardrails and governance you need around that. Do you see your partners rolling out custom small language models for large enterprise clients?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think most of our SIs have an approach where they're actually doing small models. And I think that's a very good reason for that. The reason is they want to specialize in domain,
Hmm.
and they want to be able to give a high focus on fidelity or localization on the models. Whereas, the larger frontier LLMs will be more general purpose
Hmm.
and may have great knowledge overall, but may not have the specific domain knowledge. So if I'm looking for a specialization in taxation in a particular country, or a regulatory requirement,
Sure.
it's very important to bring that to the model with a high level of accuracy. You don't want to be guessing, and
Right.
I think that's only feasible with the small language models, and that's the approach most SIs are taking.
That you bring up a really, really interesting point, which is regulation in different countries. Confluent, of course, is all around the world. We're seeing data sovereignty become a very, very serious issue. And so once again, companies that can leverage a framework and a technology stack which knows where the data is and how it gets used, they're in a good position to deal with that. If you don't have that capacity, I mean, you're just rolling the dice, right?
Yeah. And we see that all the time. And I'm sure if your listeners are listening in, and they'll hear today, a lot of that activity is in markets like Middle East, like, Saudi. There's a huge explosion of AI, but it's all driven around the sovereign play. And,
Hmm.
they are very adamant. They want local data
Right.
residency.
Right.
And I think in AI generally, there's a lot of sensitivity on that. And so with Confluent, we actually announced again a partnership in Saudi with Saudi Cloud Computing as CCC
Okay.
for that reason, where they wanted local. They had a very significant use case. They wanted local residency of the data. They wanted Confluent to be in a secure sovereign
Nice.
offering. And a lot of the cloud providers are now just getting into some markets such as the Middle
Wow.
East. AWS doesn't exist in Saudi, right?
Wow.
So just imagine they want to consume. They're probably one of the largest consumers of GPUs. They've put billions of dollars of investments in GPUs and training models and inference. They want to leverage the stack, and of course they want to put their sovereign footprint on it.
That is amazing stuff. Well, folks, we're up at our first break. Don't touch that dial. We'll be right back. You're listening to DM Radio. All right, ladies and gentlemen, back here on DM Radio at Current, the Confluent event in New Orleans, my old haunt. Pretty excited to be here, bringing up old memories, so that's always fun. But one thing about Kafka is it's this immutable log. It's got all this data, and data streaming, of course, is really a revolutionary way of treating enterprise data. Now, it's not new. There was MQ series and BizTalk and all these messaging systems over the years, but this is really a robust architecture for being able to stream data in topics for whoever wants them, solves a whole lot of ETL problems, which I focused a lot on 20 odd years ago when I first got into this industry. So with me now is Andrew Sellers. He was with the Air Force for a while. He did some cybersecurity work for the government. Now you're here at Confluent. Tell us a bit about how you keep these environments secure, and you talked about Confluent Intelligence. Let's start there maybe. What is Confluent Intelligence
Sure.
and how can people use it?
So Confluent Intelligence, I'd say, is the culmination of a ton of market research and sort of customer engagement that we've done over the last 2 years. And so over the last particularly 18 months, we've interviewed over 200 of our customers
Wow.
to try and understand what their ambitions are for artificial intelligence and how the data streaming platform can help. The thing you want to avoid, of course, is bringing a solution to the market in search of a problem.
Right.
And so what we did instead was we looked at to see what were the things that were really keeping our customers from being successful and transitioning from a very exciting POC where they prove something very interesting on a local machine and get it to the point where they can get it into production and get real return on investment for it. And what we found the difference is that it was all about getting good contextualized, relevant, and trustworthy data in an accessible way to the agents or workflows that used LLMs to actually make great decisions. Said a bit differently, I mean, we've all used ChatGPT and it's a wondermating toy.
Right.
There's great things that can come from it, but
Right.
it's not really helpful for making business decisions or automating business workflows because it doesn't really understand about anything about our domain specific data in our enterprise that the LLM was never trained on.
Right.
And so it's in a sense, it's very different than most of the AI used in my career. You know, at this point, I embarrassed to say I went to, graduate school decades ago, studied artificial intelligence, and have spent a lot of my career ever since as either an ML researcher or someone who commercialized AI-enabled technologies. And the way that most of my career worked is there was this bespoke ML model that was created by this legion of PhDs in data science and statistics. And they would do activities like feature engineering, or then they do model training, and they do bias characterization, and they would then deploy that model maybe once a week, and that was enough to be competitive. And the legion of PhDs would then move on to the next problem. The foundation models like LLMs have created something really revolutionary, in that I no longer need that legion of PhDs. I have this general model that's pretty good at a lot of things, but the data engineering challenges still remain because it doesn't know anything about my domain-specific enterprise data. The best patterns we have in order to get good decision making out of it and get the outcomes we want and to have good alignment is we take the most relevant domain specific data that we have, and we couple that with a prompt, and in order to deliver the sophisticated reactive experiences that our internal knowledge workers and our external customers have come to expect, we do that at query time, at inference time.
Wow.
And so now all of a sudden, these data streaming technologies are more relevant to AI than they necessarily were before. They always existed on the fringe. That's how I got into this, was a real-time learning use case. But what we find now is that what we can really help our customers is basically using the same superpower that Kafka already had, this ability to decouple teams and systems and technologies, but then to actually then provide well contextualized, trustworthy data to these LLMs in real time so they can make good decisions. And so everything that we did with Confluent Intelligence is about taking these things that were very possible with these technologies, but then now making them accessible to these new personas. So the way that data scientists and others can now quickly ideate, instantiate, and then move to production these workflows that basically take really important and at times disparate enterprise data. So it turns out the agent, to make the right decision, may have part of the information in some customer database somewhere, and the inventory management system has some other piece that it needs, and then there's something about customer and company policy that'll also inform that decision. All of that state can be then built into a context engine, and this is the really exciting new capability we launched alongside our existing streaming agents capability. That now, in a stateful way, that agent can react to events and know enough about the business, and enough about, say, your customers or something else, to then make a really good decision as it goes all the way through.
Right.
So can I just give an example of something like that? We had customers come in and talk about some of the experiences they've had, and one has a loyalty program, and in order to deliver a really compelling, hyper personalized offering, to say that, oh, I'm going to stay in a hotel in this particular part of the country, and the kind of customer that responds to this kind of discount, and I tend to like these this kind of hotel. There's a lot of parameters there, and so that customer can be presented by something an agent generates, an offer that literally no one else has gone before. And that's only possible if that agent is well contextualized with all that other information. It needs to know something about the inventory level of the hotel rooms. It needs to know something about the location, and needs to know quite a bit about the customer. And if it does all those things, the experience that can be delivered while the customer is actually actively prompting and looking for something is something we could have been maybe possible, but was totally infeasible to deliver a few years ago.
That's wild. The thing that really strikes me, there are several things, but one is the vastly different set of access patterns you're going to see now with agents, because they're these little tiny agents. They just want this and that, a couple different things, as opposed to batch movement of large amounts of data from this system to that system to update overnight and these kinds of things. These are wildly different access patterns.
That's right.
And what have you done at Confluent to accommodate that? Like, in other words, literally, how do you get it done? What were you able to shift in order to enable these topics of immutable logs to pivot to these granular use cases at great numbers?
It's a fantastic question. Here's how I think we conceptually think about what data ought to be. So often it's a detritus of the business. It's this thing you have to manage because it's this great expense. You have to, every time you add new data sets, you have to hire more people to manage them.
Right.
And it's a very non-linear thing, because they've got to integrate in a bespoke kind of specialized way with all the other data processors in your enterprise already.
Right.
The virtue of something like data streaming is there's a single conceptual operating model for how data is produced and how it is consumed by others. And that really simplifies things a lot. The other thing I'll say, and you and I have been doing this a long time, one of the truisms of my career is that the bigger data gets, the more specialized one has to be in how that data is organized and queried. The specialization of data streaming is data is meant to be consumed. And so to your point, with agents being these stochastic things, being these things that we actually want them to induce the right kind of outcomes. We don't want to prescriptively tell them what to do.
Right.
It means we can't necessarily anticipate the access patterns a priori.
Right.
So if data is consumable, then it's just a matter of instantiating a new consumer group. And I don't necessarily need to optimize my data for a particular kind of query pattern the way I do with so many other data stores. I love wide column data stores, but you have to almost know a priori the query pattern because you have to create a column family literally per query.
Right.
But that's not something you're forced into
Right.
with data streaming because you just make a new consumer group and now you're not wedded to a particular query pattern or access pattern.
That's
And
very
so
interesting. Yeah.
the other part of that with our data streaming platform that we've really emphasized when we bring it to market is this ability to make data a reusable asset, to make it this thing that's contextualized, that's discoverable, that's trustworthy and secure in and of itself. And if you do that, then you don't need to know, beforehand what the question you want to ask is, because data is well contextualized, because it's trustworthy. Something else can consume the data and know what it needs to know without having to query in a way that forces you into a particular kind of question that you need to ask, say again, like a graph data store or a document or something else.
Right. That's interesting. And he said a priori twice. I love that. This guy's a philosopher too, right?
I suppose. Yeah, that's fair.
That's as opposed to a posteriori, right?
That's right. Exactly.
That's the other one.
The other way.
Oh yeah. Yeah. No, this is, well, you're
Which is what
creating,
Confluent does.
right, well, there you go.
Yeah.
You're creating this declarative environment now in terms of getting things done. You're not telling the agents how to do it. You're giving them access and giving them the objective of what they need to accomplish. I mean, the agent to agent communication is the part that really captivates my mind, is like, so you have to have an orchestrator, someone who's in charge.
Yep.
Is this a model that you see where there's a sort of orchestrating agent and then some worker bee agents? Is that common?
I think it's very common. And so, yeah, I mean, I think multi-agent systems is something that we're studying in academia. I looked at them myself when I was in graduate school. The thing there's some of the common patterns. You get certainly orchestrator. You have hierarchical, which is almost a generalization of orchestrator, where you can almost think of it as a tree, and that every non-leaf node is the orchestrator for its subtree, and then it all rolls up to some root. Or excuse me, so it's just to something that is in fact now the head of kind of all orchestration. You have Blackboard patterns, you have marketplace patterns, lots of ways in which agents can be choreographed or collaborate. The thing I think that's very powerful now with agents is you actually have this idea of dynamic orchestration, where I basically tell the agent, this is the task I want you to solve. These are the tools at your disposal. These are the other agents that you have at your disposal, and those things are specialists. Go ahead and solve the problem. And at each step, I can decide, okay, I think the first step to decompose this kind of problem is I should ask this kind of a question.
Right.
The next step would be this one. And so to give an example of that, I've seen a lot of this in our customers, is that we'll automate what are known as sales development representative tasks. And so I don't know if for the enterprise SaaS people out there, they already know this, but for everyone else, if you look at the enterprise SaaS sales ladder, the entry level rung tends to be what are known as sales development reps. These are the people that traditionally have like cold call people on the phone.
Right.
Their whole job is to generate and qualify leads.
Right.
Well, it turns out if we have agents that do that kind of work, there's enough different tasks there that we actually want to decompose that work into several different agents. The intuition being that agents are like people, they're better when they're specialized.
Interesting.
And the other thing about that is if I'm developing an agent, a hyper-specialized agent is far more easy to develop and sort of reason about what the inbound data is, so I can really limit the things it can touch. And also then I can reason about what its outcome should be much easier as well. If I have a big monolithic agent that does all this stuff, reasoning about all the edge cases of what data it should see and the decisions it could make can be really hard. But if I've got an agent whose literally only job is to ingest some third-party data stream and decide is this a good lead or not, some other one that looks at a LinkedIn
Interesting.
profile and
Right.
enriches that with some other information. Then
Right.
some other agent that then decides, is this a good nurture campaign where I sort of, slowly drip some information to this person, or where I, basically make an offer to, here's a free demo credit or something, with my platform.
That's
That
so
just
wild.
varies of agents. And so then the dynamic orchestration version of that, back to our first point, is I've
Right.
got a dynamic orchestrator where I would tell it, here's your service catalog of the available agents that work for you.
Mm-hmm.
I want you to qualify this lead. And then it can decide at each point, okay, the first part of qualifying the lead is getting some data about it.
Mm-hmm.
The next thing is enriching that data with, social media profiles. The next one is deciding, okay, do I actually, ask something to do it, or do I, just slowly send it some emails? And the next final step would be actually go do those things. And the orchestrator can decide all that. So yeah, you do see dynamic orchestration, and we see it all the time.
And what's really cool about that, and I'm a marketer from way back,
Sure.
is being able to test out theories
That's right.
and then track how well they work.
Yep.
Because you can have a layer that just seeks to monitor the metrics. Okay, you did this task that way, this agent did a task this way. This was faster, but that was more robust, for
Yeah.
example. And then you can make decisions about that and just constantly improve the environment. And I think that's the real magic, right? Is that this is great for experimentation. It's great for dynamic automation is what it gets down to, but it's great for being able to try things. And then once you determine, okay, this is a defined pattern, let's harden that, move on to the next thing, right?
That's right. Yeah, I think A/B testing is really common because these things are fundamentally stochastic.
Right.
And so the ability to, experiment empirically is about all we have.
Right.
There's no sort of theoretical, does the agent work?
Right.
Formal verification.
Right.
You just got to run it a bunch of times.
Right.
Yeah.
That's pretty funny.
I think the QA stack will improve, but yeah, right now we're in the wild west of these things. Yeah.
That's exactly what it is. It's the Wild West. And so
Yeah.
every company is different. I look forward to the optimization of existing stacks as well. We just had a customer panel, and one of the customers said that actually we did sunset Redis.
Yep.
And so we did a show a couple years ago of sunsetting applications and other enterprise fairy tales,
Yeah.
joking that it doesn't happen. It's
Yeah.
very difficult to end an application.
Yep.
End of life is a very painful thing. But now we could start to get there. And security, I want to get into security a little bit. We've got a minute left in this segment.
Sure.
Security is the most unwieldy, uh, uh, challenging discipline, I think, in all of these spaces,
Yep.
because it takes all sorts of forms, right?
That's
Real
right.
quick, 40 seconds.
Yeah, I think that some of the ways that we tackle some of these challenges is because we're so involved in data, that we think a lot about data security. And we make sure we apply all of the best practices for our customers. Things like encryption, things like pseudonymization, data isolation, all those controls exist in order to really help our customers be assured that their data is safe with us.
That makes a lot of sense. Well, folks, don't touch that dial. I'll be right back. We're on DMRadio talking to Andrew Sellers of Confluent. And of course, we're here in New Orleans at the current event. I think this is the 10th or 11th conference. I think my first one was 2014, maybe, in San Francisco. So time flies and you're having fun. We'll be right back. You're listening to DM Radio. All right, ladies and gentlemen, back here on DM Radio, talking to Kamal Brar. He is the alliances guy for Confluent, so he's all around the world. And, Kamal, I always wonder, what are the classic use cases for a company that is experimenting and trying to figure out where to go with streaming data? What are some common use cases that could be good starter projects for an enterprise?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think we see a ton of applicable use cases, but candidly, I think it comes down to where do you think there's a significant prioritization in the business, right? You want to, where there's pain, there's willingness to go explore an alternative solution.
Right.
No point doing something that's nice to have.
Right.
And so what we've seen is in retail, like we see more and more focus on leveraging some of the capabilities around fraud management, like, dealing with theft in stores in real time. How do they capture that through video surveillance and looking at real-time data and identifying repeat offenders and sharing that information with the authorities? That's an obvious one. But again, trying to understand the patterns around the theft and predictability, because that's a big problem for retail. So they rely heavily on real-time analytics and real-time data for that. I talked a bit about just generally around the adoption of some of these areas like telecoms. So in the telco space, I think there's a big focus on leveraging analytics and real-time data on engagement, right? So you think about some of the use cases there, like if I'm engaging on my phone for any type of sporting activity, like I refer to cricket just because I grew up in Australia. But when you have these large populations of folks watching and engaging in sporting activities, whether it's NFL, cricket, or soccer, you want to be able to provide real-time capabilities around adverts and personalizing that experience. And generally, I think the rule of thumb is 17 minutes is the engagement you get on a mobile device for any type of real-time sporting event. You're not going to generally watch the whole event on your device. And how do you make that impactful? And how does that change? And how does your workloads change? And how do you charge more for a certain premium ads in that segment?
Right.
And so all that is driven very heavily around real-time data and personalizing that experience, which is very obvious to us as a consumer, like, hey, I would assume this just happens.
Right.
But in the back end, I'm subscribing to data. I'm actually fetching the inferencing data from different systems.
Wow.
Serving that in a personalized fashion for Eric, who cares maybe more about NFL, than Kamal, who may be like, hey, I care about cricket. And so I'm more interested in what promotions you have on that side. So I think that personalization experience and real-time nature of those kind of use cases is pretty cool. And it's just about breaking those down into initial business use cases on, hey, what's the pain point? How do we identify what's a metric to identify on measuring that impact, and how quickly can we get to that? And then you look at the technology footprint.
How often do you see cost reduction as a primary driver versus top line revenue? In other words, how often do you see let's control our operational costs versus let's do new things to bring in new money?
Yeah, depending on your business. Today we see retail. I've seen customers in our space who have gone to 1 billion downloads on their app.
Wow.
In like records, like I think they hit the world record on the most downloads on App Store.
Wow.
And their focus is adoption, right? So for them, while cost is important, their primary goal has been, hey, let's get the adoption, let's get the awareness out of the products. And they're in the retail space, so that for them, they're in tier 3 cities, and compete aggressively in terms of e-commerce. And their primary goal is, we just want our app to be ubiquitous, and we want that to become the #1 experience for tier 2, tier 3 cities in their world. And so they have spent a ton of money on innovating, and that experience should be great, should be unique, down to, hey, can I put a virtual watch if I want to buy the watch and see that on my wrist? So that experience and that ability to do something that's quite innovative is what pulls and attracts, down to things like payment interfaces. They use crypto, and so I think that innovation for them has worked really well. But as they mature in their adoption, they then to look at, hey, how do we optimize? And so that's been the general pattern. I've seen like 12 to 18 months, a lot of their investments around innovate, get adoption. Once they hit a adoption number that they were comfortable with, and it's not to say they don't continue growing that adoption, but the reality is the adoption rate may slow. And so they went from being 0 to maybe 50 million, and that 50 million very quickly went to 300 million.
Right. Wow.
And as they scale now to 400 million users on their platform, it's been cost focused.
Wow, that's very interesting. The last question I'll throw at you maybe is around all these different models, and the pace of innovation really is blistering. It's hard to keep up. I'm an analyst in this space. It's hard for me to keep up with everything that people are doing. But I remember there is a sort of a movie we've seen before with Hadoop, and you probably remember this, the HDFS, right? You had like 6 or 7 different distros of HDFS.
I was there.
And then it was like 5, and it was 4, and it was 3, and I was like, okay.
It was one of my previous companies, so I know all about it.
You know all about that stuff.
I know all about it.
And I think we learned a lot in that time. I think we learned a lot about cluster management, and that kind of opened a whole new door to new ways of doing things. It's almost like a new kind of virtualization in a sense, right?
Yeah.
But do you think that it's going to calm down a little bit with all these new models spinning out, or is it just going to keep going?
Yeah, I think what's different in the big data domain, like when we had HDFS, like, we went from this proliferation of everyone having Hadoop distributions to it eventually did consolidate, right, to effectively Hortonworks and Cloudera.
Right.
But I think ultimately on the model side, if you look at ChatGPT, it's really more consumer-led, general purpose, and then I think the other models have specialized. I think Mistral has been more focused on certain international expansion. They've been focused more on public sectors and kind of those type of use cases. I think on Anthropic, everyone kind of appreciates the complexity of what they've done with being very purposeful around engineering and some of the code generation stuff that they've been kind of integrating. And so I think every model's kind of pivoted towards an area that they feel like they can add differentiation. And then I think that's going to continue. And the same thing happens in the voice models, where today you may have 11 Labs, which is kind of more creator content, and then you have Cartesia, which is more enterprise. And so I think there's different swim lanes and kind of differentiating in a different way. I don't think it's going to be a mass consolidation. Having said that, I think Google and Meta are also really interesting in their own rights.
Right.
And they do things at very, very large scale. So you never know, right?
Yeah.
And they've just Meta's made some interesting moves lately, and you can't tell.
That's wild. And then you get Salesforce, this company that bought Slack, it bought Tableau, it just bought Informatica. We're all like, what?
Yeah.
Like, what's happening? It's like the old guard. But I think in many of these situations in enterprises, you have all this infrastructure, and it's always hard to rip and replace anything. And we joked that, we did a show a couple of years ago on sunsetting applications and other fantasies from the enterprise world, because it's just really freaking hard to do.
Yeah.
But I think you're going to have these models as a sort of overlay and as a connective tissue, being able to pull from the source systems as needed and then execute transactions and do things like customer service, like marketing, like analyzing data, all that kind of stuff. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think you're spot on. Like, I think that's going to become a natural flow on the maturity curve of the adoption of the models themselves. I guess I don't have a strong opinion on that today. What I would say is that it's probably going to happen quicker than we think. And so if I was a betting man, I think we probably don't even know some of the disruption that's going to come.
Right.
We kind of feel like, hey, this is potentially going to happen, but we can't tell. But my bet would be we're going to see some totally new, different approaches to it that we didn't imagine. I can tell you, like I said, I never imagined you could build an app, or you can even today log into ChatGPT and say, I want to build an agent.
Right.
And build your own agent.
Right.
And kind of integrate it into their stack if you want it. Like,
that's just wild.
I would never think, and it would write like whatever, a couple 100,000,
Right.
100 lines of code, which I don't understand anymore, to be honest. But yeah, it's remarkable.
Well, and you can use the engine to explain the code too.
Yeah,
Like, what does this code do? What does that code do? I mean, really, you think about media, you think about education. These were, I mean, institutions. These are industries. And I look at media and I think it's kind of out the window, because now your reporter is an agent that's just finding information for you, fetching information and triangulating the truth. You can go down any number of rabbit holes anytime you want and learn anything. And that's the case with education too,
we could
right?
take your podcast, script it all right now, and make it all
well,
automated.
we turned some of these into a TV show called Future Proof, which is all about how today's technology designs tomorrow. And I was curious to know, I'm like, I'll take a transcript and ask it to give me a 30-minute version for a TV show. Bam, did it. You're just like, wow. So it's an accelerator more than anything. It is going to replace jobs in many cases, but I think mostly the key, folks, is learn how to use this stuff for your own purposes and your own businesses, and then you'll be on the front end and the cutting edge of that wave, right?
Couldn't agree more.
All right, well,
it's fun to play with too.
Yeah, Kamal Brar, what a fantastic conversation. Good luck with your adventures, and we'll talk to you next time, folks. You've been listening to DM Radio.
Thanks, Eric.
All right, back here on DM Radio, talking to Andrew Sellers of Confluent, all about the big announcements here. And TableFlow was one of the announcements, which I understand allows you to persist streams in table format, like an iceberg, which is like connecting the two powers of the universe here, right? Because you got streaming and then you got static. You want to do analysis on tables, and TableFlow allows you to do that, right? To take streams of data and persist them in table format, such that it can then work with these other environments, right?
That's right. I think so. One observation we'll just make about the industry is I think that businesses tend to have two disparate stacks of personas and technologies and organizations that do very different things. The first one is we'll call the operational estate that actually powers the business. So these are all the transactional systems, your inventory systems, your enterprise resource systems, the things that actually run and power your business. telemetry from those, so the individual events at some point in some way tend to be extracted and they tend to be sent to the other part of the business we'll call the analytic estate, which is a different set of personas,
Right.
different technology stack, different organization that then finds insight from the business. And that information tends to flow in most enterprises kind of one direction. You know, it goes from the operational to the analytic, and from there you maybe create a dashboard or some kind of report that an executive watches once a week. And by the time that happens, it's like, well, maybe that data is you know, a day old.
Right.
You know, because these cascading data pipelines will do something and
Right.
something else will happen. You know, maybe at best it's maybe an hour or two old. And
Right.
you know, that was good enough the way the businesses used to run.
Right.
But now that we're in the age of agentic AI, where we actually automate a lot of decision making, the insights that come from the analytic part of the business, they need to actually form the operational part of the business.
Right.
And it needs to be done with a decision, you know, feedback cycle that is far faster than days.
Right.
And so this is something that was very important to us to try and address and figure out. We have a lot of customers. A very common use case for us is that data movement, is what is known as change data capture, which is a common pattern by which data is taken from some kind of operational data store, and then, you know, individual events that are inserted into it are noted, captured, if you will,
Right.
and sent through Kafka to integrate with one of these other systems and typically sunk into, say, a data warehouse or a data lake or something similar. But what we found is over time, we wanted to appeal to data scientists and those other personas that do that analytic work. And I think we tried for a long time to just get them to use Kafka. It turns out there's no reason that a data scientist can't write a Kafka consumer, but they don't.
Right.
And so what was really important for us, I think, was to have this idea that, hey, they have a different conceptual model. They don't like consuming data as streams. They want to consume it as tables. Some agents are the same way that can be built. Other applications like to consume things as streams. And so this table flow capability we mentioned is exactly like you said. It takes a Kafka topic and materializes it as either an iceberg or Delta Lake table and integrates fully with, you know, the various metadata catalogs. So what happens then is you now have this Kafka data, this Confluent Kafka data that is a first-class citizen in these OLAP engines. And so when you have different teams that use different technologies, you know, something that uses DuckDB or Trino or Dremio or something, they can actually ingest that data and query it in a very consistent way with the same data that is being consumed elsewhere in the organization as a stream by an application. And what's really powerful about that is now both parts of the business can integrate and work together, and they have a consistent view of data, and they consume it with the conceptual model that they prefer. And neither has any idea that the other one isn't doing that.
Wow.
And that, I think, is a really powerful thing, particularly in the age of AI, because it breaks down that barrier, that silo.
Right.
It enables much faster decision making.
Right.
And it provides, you know, a reusability to that data too that didn't exist before, because so much of those workflows before something like Tableflow meant that every time I wanted a new insight or create a new dashboard or something, I had to rationalize how that data got sourced. I'd have to go to those sources and bring it all in. And so you'd find over time with enterprises, data engineering teams that have built tens of thousands of data pipelines because there's no way to discover what had been done before, and none of this was reusable. Well, when you make all that, you know, available in a catalog, and you can see these data products available in different ways and allowing both consumption patterns, well, now for the first time, you can eliminate a bunch of redundancy. So it lowers your total cost of ownership. And because data is this reusable asset, and so much of a new application or a new insight is the data modeling aspect, your time to market is now so much faster for the next insight, the next application. So we're really excited about what Tableflow is enabling there. We call it the shift left pattern, where basically I take a lot of the processing and governance work that's done, you know, near the end of the data lifecycle, and we move it far closer to production. And that tends to make data more reliable. It tends to be a lot cheaper, and it tends to make data reusable. So we're really excited about those capabilities. It's really powerful.
That's really cool. And we got about 3 minutes left here. So I think you hit on something that is really compelling, namely connecting the two sides of the house in a much more agile and immediate way. Because in the old days, they were wildly separate, and you would only get an occasional, like once a month or once a quarter, some new initiative to do something. Now it can be every day. And the sooner you learn about a problem, I'm a big fan of cliches, a stitch in time saves 9.
That's right.
Literally, if you stitch it now, as opposed to later, you'll have to do 1 stitch. Later, you'll have to do 10, right? And the other thing that blows my mind is the spaghetti sprawl of ETL scripts in
Yeah.
some of these organizations. I'm
Exactly.
sure you know.
Yeah. No, we've seen
It's
it.
insane.
Yep.
And it drives the engineers nuts. That's why they leave. They get burned
Yeah.
out and they can't stand it. Do you see in the next couple of years AI and traditional machine learning being able to sort of catalog and then deconstruct and allow the reconstruction of that spaghetti mess into something more cogent and cost effective and efficient?
Well, we would argue that streaming ETL through something like Confluent is a great solution for a lot of that work to be done, because now those intermediate data products are discoverable and they're cataloged, and so then they become reusable and they can be collapsed. And I do think artificial intelligence can help with that migration and rationalization work to recognize, okay, these 5 ETL pipelines in your old system, they're basically doing the same thing.
Right.
And so they can be collapsed and mapped to this other one. You know, we
Right.
find the LLMs right now and LLM-enabled applications are actually really good as long as we're very deliberate about the use case selection. We
Interesting.
fundamentally have to choose something that the LLMs are good at, and they're very
Right.
good at summarization, objectification, and like what you talked about, like metadata generation. They're really good at looking at a thing and then summarizing what it does and creating some metadata around it. And then from there, that's a lot of the way toward entity resolution, which would be
Interesting.
the problem of determining are these different pipelines actually the same thing.
Right.
And again, it's something that it may not get you to 100%,
Right.
but if you could eliminate 80 or 90%, boy, that's a much less daunting challenge for your data engineering team to go clean up now.
That's right. And it paves the way to these new agentic data flows that we
That's
were
right.
just talking about, right?
For sure.
Basically you're opening up capacity for all the little small messages to get through, to get their little things done, because you don't have these huge 18-wheelers rolling down the highway all day,
I
right?
like that analogy. That's awesome. Yeah, that's good.
Well, look this gentleman up online, Andrew Sellers from Confluent. Very cool stuff. Thank you so much. You've been listening to DM Radio.